Welcome back to the channel. This is XRP On Moon, where we uncover the truth behind the biggest, boldest, and sometimes most shocking headlines in the crypto world. And today, you need to pay very close attention because a narrative is spreading right now that is designed to trigger fear at the highest level. The claim, XRP will disappear overnight, and Eric Trump confirms it. Now think about how serious that sounds for a second. An asset held by millions, traded globally, and integrated into financial discussions suddenly vanishing without warning. That's not just a prediction, that's a full-blown panic trigger. And if you're holding XRP or even watching the market, this is exactly the kind of headline that can shake confidence instantly. But here's where things get interesting. Because in crypto, what spreads the fastest is not always what's true, it's what's most emotional. And this headline, it's engineered for maximum emotional impact. Now let's slow this down and look at it logically, because smart investors don't react, they analyze. XRP is not some unknown token that just appeared yesterday. It's one of the most established digital assets in the market, backed by years of development, strong community support, and real-world use cases through Ripple's payment technology. We're talking about a network that aims to transform cross-border payments by making them faster, cheaper, and more efficient compared to traditional systems. So when you hear that something like this could disappear overnight, your first instinct shouldn't be fear, it should be skepticism, because for something of this scale to vanish instantly, there would have to be massive warning signs, liquidity drying up, exchanges delisting, institutions pulling out, and global regulatory actions happening all at once. And right now, none of that is happening. So where is this coming from? That's the real question. The mention of Eric Trump adds fuel to the fire because any association with a high-profile political figure automatically increases the perceived credibility of the claim, even if there's no verified statement supporting it. This is how narratives are built in today's digital world. Take a recognizable name, attach it to a dramatic claim, and let the algorithm do the rest. Within hours, it spreads across social media, YouTube thumbnails, and crypto forums, creating the illusion that something major has been confirmed. But when you actually dig deeper, you often find there's no solid evidence, just speculation, misinterpretation, or completely fabricated connections. And this is exactly where most investors make their biggest mistake. They react to the headline instead of investigating the reality. Because fear is powerful. It overrides logic. It pushes people to make decisions they wouldn't normally make under calm conditions. And in a market like crypto, where volatility is already high, that kind of emotional reaction can be extremely costly. But here's the truth that experienced players understand. If XRP were truly at risk of disappearing overnight, the market would already be reflecting that in a very obvious way. You would see massive, uncontrollable sell-offs, liquidity collapsing, and a complete breakdown in trading activity. Instead, what we're seeing is normal fluctuation, ongoing trading, and continued discussion around XRP's role in the financial ecosystem. So before you let a headline control your thinking, ask yourself this: who benefits from me believing this? Because in markets, narratives are not just information, they are influence. And the difference between those who lose and those who win often comes down to one simple thing: the ability to stay calm while everyone else is panicking. Now let's take this a step further, because once you move past the emotional shock of that headline, you start to see something much more strategic unfolding beneath the surface. Narratives like XRP will disappear overnight don't just appear randomly. They tend to emerge at very specific moments in the market, and understanding that timing is where the real insight begins. Right now, the crypto space as a whole is entering a phase where regulation, institutional involvement, and global financial shifts are all colliding at once. Governments are tightening their stance. Major financial institutions are quietly positioning themselves, and blockchain technology is no longer being ignored. It's being studied, tested, and in some cases, adopted. And right in the middle of all this sits XRP, a digital asset that has always had one foot in crypto and the other in traditional finance. This is what makes XRP different, and also what makes it a constant target for speculation. Unlike many other cryptocurrencies that rely purely on hype cycles or community momentum, XRP is tied to a broader vision of transforming how money moves globally. Ripple, the company associated with XRP, has spent years building connections with banks and payment providers, aiming to solve inefficiencies in cross-border transactions. That kind of positioning naturally attracts attention, but it also invites scrutiny, criticism, and yes, even fear-driven narratives. Because when an asset is connected to real-world financial infrastructure, any uncertainty around it becomes amplified. So when a claim like this starts circulating, you have to look at the environment it's appearing in. Are we seeing increased discussion around crypto regulation? Yes. Are there ongoing debates about which digital assets will survive long-term? Absolutely. Are institutions quietly accumulating while retail investors hesitate? That's been a pattern seen multiple times in this market. And this is where things get very interesting, because while retail investors are reacting emotionally to headlines, larger players are often doing the opposite. They're observing, analyzing, and positioning themselves based on long-term potential rather than short-term noise. Think about how markets typically move. Fear creates selling pressure, and selling pressure creates lower prices. Lower prices, in turn, create opportunities for accumulation. This cycle repeats over and over again, and those who understand it don't get shaken out easily. Instead, they ask deeper questions. For example, if XRP were truly on the verge of disappearing, why would it still maintain strong liquidity across major exchanges? Why would development continue? Why would there still be active discussions around its use in financial systems? These are not the signs of an asset about to vanish. They're signs of an asset still very much in the game. At the same time, it's important to stay balanced. Just because a narrative is exaggerated doesn't mean there are no risks. XRP, like every other cryptocurrency, operates in a highly unpredictable environment. Regulatory decisions, technological challenges, and competition from other blockchain projects are all real factors that can influence its future. But those are gradual, evolving risks, not sudden, overnight disappearances triggered by a viral claim, and understanding that difference is critical because it allows you to respond with clarity instead of panic. Another layer to this is how quickly information spreads today. Social media platforms are designed to amplify content that gets engagement, and nothing gets engagement faster than fear. A calm, rational analysis doesn't go viral, but a shocking statement does. And once that statement gains traction, it creates a ripple effect where more people start talking about it, reacting to it, and ultimately believing it. This is how narratives gain power, even when they're not grounded in verified facts. So the real takeaway here is not just about XRP, it's about awareness. Awareness of how narratives are formed, how they spread, and how they influence behavior. Because once you recognize that pattern, you stop being reactive and start being strategic. And in a market where timing and psychology play such a huge role, that shift in mindset can make all the difference. Now let's break down the mechanics behind how a narrative like XRP will disappear overnight actually spreads so aggressively. Because once you understand this system, you start to see the market very differently. It rarely begins with a fully formed false claim. Instead, it usually starts with a small piece of information, something vague, incomplete, or taken out of context. It could be a general statement about crypto risks, a comment about regulation, or even a discussion about market uncertainty. Then that small piece gets picked up and slightly modified. One word changes, then another, and suddenly the meaning shifts. Risk becomes threat. Uncertainty becomes collapse. And before long, you have a headline that feels urgent, dramatic, and almost impossible to ignore. That's exactly how something like an alleged connection to Eric Trump can be injected into the narrative. Whether he actually made a direct statement about XRP or not becomes irrelevant, because the story has already taken on a life of its own. From there, algorithms take over. Social media platforms are not designed to prioritize truth. They are designed to prioritize engagement. And nothing drives engagement faster than fear and controversy. When people see a headline suggesting that a major asset like XRP could vanish overnight, they react instantly. They click, they comment, they share, and every interaction tells the algorithm, this is important, push it further. As a result, the most extreme version of the story becomes the most visible one. This creates a powerful illusion, because when you see the same claim repeated across multiple platforms, it starts to feel credible, even if there's no solid evidence behind it. Repetition creates perceived truth, and that's one of the most dangerous psychological traps in the digital age. But here's where disciplined investors separate themselves from the crowd. Instead of reacting to what's trending, they slow everything down and start asking critical questions. Where is the original source? Is there a verified statement? Are credible outlets reporting the same claim? And most importantly, is the market behavior aligning with the narrative? Because markets don't lie in the same way headlines can. If XRP were genuinely on the brink of disappearing, you wouldn't need a viral post to tell you. You would see it instantly in the data. Trading volumes would collapse, major exchanges would begin emergency delistings, and liquidity would dry up across the board. None of that is happening. What we're seeing instead is normal volatility, ongoing trading activity, and continued relevance in the broader crypto discussion. In other words, reality is not matching the narrative. There's also a deeper layer to consider, and this is where things become even more strategic. In markets driven heavily by sentiment, influencing perception can be just as powerful as influencing fundamentals. If enough people believe an asset is at risk, their behavior changes. They sell, they hesitate, they spread doubt. And that shift in behavior can create temporary price movements, which then appear to confirm the original fear, even if it was unfounded to begin with. It becomes a self-reinforcing cycle where perception starts to shape reality, at least in the short term. This doesn't require a coordinated effort or a grand conspiracy. It simply requires enough momentum behind a narrative to influence crowd psychology. And this is why emotional control is one of the most valuable skills you can develop in crypto, because every cycle brings new headlines, new fears, and new reasons to doubt. The investors who succeed are not the ones who avoid these moments. They're the ones who navigate them without losing clarity. They understand that not every loud claim deserves a reaction, and not every trend represents truth. Instead of asking, what if this is real? They also ask, what if this is noise? And that second question is often the one that protects them from making costly mistakes. So when you look at XRP through this lens, the situation becomes much clearer. The narrative of an overnight disappearance is not supported by evidence, not reflected in market behavior, and not confirmed by credible sources. What it is, however, is a powerful example of how quickly information can be distorted, amplified, and weaponized in a market that thrives on attention. And once you truly understand that process, you stop being part of the reaction and start being part of the strategy. Now let's zoom out and look at the bigger picture, because when you step back from the noise, the real story around XRP becomes much clearer and far more strategic than any viral headline suggests. XRP is not just another cryptocurrency riding hype cycles. It sits in a very unique position within the financial world. It was designed with a specific purpose in mind, to act as a bridge asset for cross-border payments, solving inefficiencies that have existed in traditional banking systems for decades. Systems like SWIFT, which still dominate global transfers, are often slow, expensive, and outdated. XRP, through Ripple's technology, aims to streamline that entire process by enabling near-instant settlement and significantly lower transaction costs. That's not just innovation. That's direct competition with legacy infrastructure. And whenever something challenges the existing system, resistance is inevitable. This is where a lot of the confusion and fear comes from. Because XRP is closely associated with real-world financial use cases, it naturally becomes part of larger conversations around regulation, compliance, and institutional control. Governments and regulatory bodies are still trying to figure out how to classify and manage digital assets, and XRP has already been at the center of one of the most high-profile legal battles in crypto history. That alone creates an environment where uncertainty can easily be amplified. But here's the key detail most people overlook. Uncertainty does not equal disappearance. In fact, in many cases, it signals that an asset is important enough to be scrutinized rather than ignored. At the same time, Ripple has continued to expand its network, working with financial institutions across different regions and building out infrastructure that goes beyond simple speculation. This isn't a project that exists only on charts and price predictions. It operates within a broader financial narrative that includes banks, payment providers, and cross-border liquidity solutions. And systems that are being integrated at that level don't just vanish overnight. They evolve, they face challenges, they adapt to regulatory frameworks, but they don't simply disappear because of a headline or an unverified claim. Now let's connect this to market behavior, because this is where things get even more interesting. Historically, crypto markets tend to go through cycles where negative sentiment peaks right before major shifts. These periods are often filled with doubt, fear, and aggressive narratives that make even strong assets look uncertain. It's almost like a stress test for investors. Only those with conviction and understanding are able to hold their position while others exit under pressure. Whether XRP is currently in one of those phases is something that can't be confirmed with certainty, but the pattern is worth paying attention to because it has repeated itself across multiple market cycles. Another important factor here is competition. XRP is not the only player in the space aiming to improve cross-border payments. There are other blockchain projects, as well as traditional financial systems, all competing for dominance. This creates a dynamic environment where narratives can be used to influence perception. If one asset is seen as risky or unstable, it can shift attention and capital toward alternatives. Again, this doesn't mean there's always intentional manipulation, but it does highlight how powerful perception is in shaping market outcomes. So when you hear a claim like XRP will disappear overnight, you have to weigh it against all of these factors: the technology, the adoption, the regulatory landscape, and the broader financial context. And when you do that, the claim starts to look less like a realistic scenario and more like an exaggerated narrative that doesn't align with the underlying reality. That doesn't mean XRP is guaranteed to succeed, and it certainly doesn't mean there are no risks, but it does mean that the idea of an instant disappearance triggered by a viral statement doesn't hold up under deeper analysis. And this is where your perspective becomes your biggest advantage, because in a market filled with noise, the ability to zoom out, connect the dots, and stay grounded in facts is what separates reactive decisions from strategic ones. And in the final part, we're going to bring everything together. what all of this means for you as an XRP holder or observer, and how to move forward with clarity in a market that constantly tests your confidence. Now, as we bring everything together, this is the moment where clarity matters more than ever, because after all the noise, all the headlines, and all the speculation, what truly matters is how you interpret this situation and what decisions you make moving forward. The claim that XRP could disappear overnight, especially when tied to a high-profile name like Eric Trump, is a perfect example of how powerful narratives can be in shaping perception, but not necessarily reality. Because when you strip away the emotion and actually analyze the facts, there is no concrete evidence, no verified confirmation, and no market behavior that supports such an extreme outcome. What we're seeing instead is a classic cycle of fear, amplification, and reaction, something that has played out countless times in the crypto space. And this is where your mindset becomes your biggest asset, because in markets like crypto, it's not just about what you hold, it's about how you think. If you react to every headline, every rumor, and every viral claim, you will constantly find yourself chasing the market instead of understanding it. But if you take a step back, analyze the situation, and focus on what's actually happening beneath the surface, you start to operate from a position of control rather than emotion. And right now, what's actually happening is this. XRP continues to exist, it continues to trade globally, it continues to be part of discussions around the future of finance, and it continues to face both opportunities and challenges like any other major digital asset. That doesn't mean there is zero risk, because there is always risk. Regulatory changes, technological competition, market cycles, and global economic factors all play a role in shaping the future of XRP, but those are long-term evolving factors, not sudden overnight events triggered by a single statement or headline. And understanding that difference is critical because it allows you to respond with logic instead of panic. The investors who succeed in this space are not the ones who avoid fear. They're the ones who manage it, who recognize when a narrative is being exaggerated, and who refuse to let emotion dictate their actions. So instead of asking yourself, what if XRP disappears overnight? Ask a better question. What is actually changing right now? Is there a fundamental shift in the technology? Is there a confirmed regulatory decision that alters its future? Is there a collapse in adoption or liquidity? Or is this simply a wave of attention-driven speculation that will pass like so many others before it? Because once you start asking the right questions, the answers become much clearer and much less alarming. And here's the bigger lesson in all of this. This won't be the last time you see something like this. The crypto market thrives on extremes. Extreme optimism during bull runs and extreme fear during uncertain times. Headlines will continue to test your confidence. Narratives will continue to challenge your beliefs. But every time you stay calm, every time you think critically, and every time you choose analysis over reaction, you strengthen your position, not just in XRP, but in the entire market. So as you move forward, remember this moment. Remember how quickly a single claim can spread, how easily it can create doubt, and how important it is to verify before you react. Because in a space where information moves faster than ever, your ability to stay grounded is what gives you an edge. And before we close, a very important reminder, this video is for informational and educational purposes only. It is not financial advice. I am not a financial advisor, and you should always do your own research before making any investment decisions. The cryptocurrency market is highly volatile, and while there are opportunities for profit, there are also significant risks involved. Never invest more than you can afford to lose, and always consider your own financial situation and risk tolerance before entering any position. Stay smart, stay patient, and stay focused, because in this market, those who think clearly are the ones who win.